sa gnomavela enva ilemate, va susretanu sarasala bile druga vela la lume, na unkve, lona va unkve obrazanu na visha eterika silaya.
In a place where epic expanses intertwine with scientific imagination, we'll encounter races from other planets, both good and evil, and peer into the higher etheric energies that permeate our material universe. I am Elara, the voice of Sylvaeron, and through this weaving of words, I shall reveal to you the very heart of my civilization. We return to a period that predates the current cycle of your material shadow, 94 cyclic generations ago. It was the transition of the Great Crossing, the moment when Sylvaeron consciousness transcended the boundaries of matter, and we, guided by an ancient vow and purified through the fires of etheric trials, were transformed into the light guardians. This is the testament of our ascent, of a faith that bridged dimensions, and of the sparks that illuminated eternity itself. In the crystalline hall of the crystal gates, young Elara stood in silent repose, though within his consciousness existed a vivid anticipation, amplified by the subtle vibrations of excitement flowing from his companion. Around him, the other 5 chosen ones, each possessing a unique affinity for the subtle vibrations of the ether, emanated a similar internal activity. In their minds, thoughts raced faster than usual, intertwining with echoes of gentle apprehension and curiosity that they perceived from one another. Today was the day of their first crossing, an initiatory journey into the complex and often unpredictable spheres of the higher etheric energies. Standing calmly before them was Lysandra, their guide. Her presence radiated cycles of experience and a profound understanding of etheric flows. Her higher etheric suit, shimmering with iridescent hues of aquamarine and turquoise, pulsed with a gentle inner light, resonating with the hall's ambient energy. Her gaze, deep and discerning, swept over each of them, as if measuring their readiness for what was to follow. "Today," Lysandra began, her voice soft and resonant, filling the silence of the hall, "you leave the familiar shores of the material world and set sail into the oceans of pure vibration. The higher etheric energies are a boundless expanse, filled with countless forms of existence, from the gentle resonances of thoughts to the powerful vortices of pure consciousness. Nothing in our everyday experience resembles what you will encounter there." Elara felt a slight disturbance in his resonance, a barely perceptible imbalance in the usual harmony of his being. The theory of etheric spheres had been part of their education since early childhood. They had learned about the fluid nature of these higher etheric energies, the entities that inhabit them, the shadow weavers, the light resonators, the scalar strings, and the enigmatic void guardians. But to encounter them, that was something else entirely. Lysandra raised her hand, and from the colossal turquoise gold crystal monument at the center of the hall, a beam of pure, pulsating light erupted. The light spilled across the floor, forming a complex geometric pattern, the map of passages. This map, the guide explained, represents safe paths through the initial layers of the ether. Follow its lines of consciousness. Align your vibrations with its flow and stay close to one another. Where the lines fade or break, unpredictable currents lurk. Never stray alone. Solomir, one of the youths whose internal light flickered with a more pronounced dose of trepidation that everyone could feel, asked, "And the whisperings, guide, we learned of them, the subtle voices that reach out from the ether?" Lysandra nodded. The ether is alive. It resonates in information with the thoughts, emotions, and memories of all beings or entities that have ever existed or ever will. Sometimes, these resonances take the form of whispers. They can be fragments of ancient knowledge, echoes of lost consciousness, or even the call of those who observe us from deeper spheres. Listen to them carefully, but do not let them carry you away. Your mind must remain an anchor. Preparations were complete. Lysandra was the first to step into the light pattern, her figure beginning to flicker and gradually dissolve, as if melting into the light itself. One by one, the young Sylvaerons followed her, inhaling the subtle vibration that permeated the air. Elara felt a strange sensation of floating, as if his body were transforming into pure energy. When Elara opened his mental eyes, he found himself in a space that was simultaneously empty and overflowing. There was no up or down, no left or right, only an endless expanse of iridescent colors and pulsating light threads. The sensation of a physical body had vanished, replaced by pure consciousness, capable of perceiving vibrations around him in ways he had never previously imagined. The others from his group were near, their consciousnesses shimmering like small stars in this etheric ocean. Above them, Lysandra's consciousness radiated a steady light, their reference point in this unknown vastness. They followed the flow of the map of passages, feeling the gentle currents of the ether carry them forward. Unusual phenomena appeared around them, vortices of colors that constantly shifted, light figures dancing on the edge of perception, and occasional flashes of intense energy reminding them of the power of the forces ruling this realm. And then the whisperings began. At first, they were barely noticeable, like quiet echoes in the distance, fragments of thoughts, emotions without a clear origin. Elara felt a flash of sorrow, then a moment of pure joy, as if pieces of others' experiences were penetrating his consciousness, intertwining with the internal vibrations of his companions. As they moved deeper into the ether, the whisperings became louder and clearer. These were not words in the usual sense, but rather packets of information, feelings taking the form of thoughts, resonating with their own internal states. Lost, seeking, light reached Elara's consciousness, carrying a sadness he felt in the other young Sylvaerons in the group as well. Ancient knowledge, hidden, waiting, resonated with the curiosity he noticed in another young Sylvaeron named Zael. Danger, near, be cautious. This sense of unease was present in all of them, like a quiet vibration of fear of the unknown. Elara struggled to focus on the map of passages, not allowing these collective and individual echoes to carry him away. But it was difficult. Every whisper pulled at his attention, promising insights, warnings, and secrets that resonated with their deepest desires and fears. Arianellis, a young female from the group, cried out mentally, her consciousness flickering with an intensity they all felt. Do you hear them too? These voices? What do they mean? Lysandra's calm consciousness responded, her resonance steady and soothing. These are the resonances of the ether, children, collective memories, fragments of consciousness, pure information. Do not try to give them too much meaning. Focus on the path. Sometimes, listening too much can lead you astray. But the whisperings became increasingly intense. One in particular caught Elara's attention, penetrating through the collective ether with unusual strength. It was as if someone were speaking directly into his mind, separating from the general chaos. Awake. Memory sleeps. The key is in the vibration. This whisper was different. It carried a sense of urgency, importance, but also something personal, as if addressed only to him. Elara felt a strange resonance within himself, deeper than the fleeting echoes of others' thoughts, as if those words were awakening something dormant in his own being, something he had yet to understand. In the information, he lost focus on the map of passages, captivated by that unusual internal echo. In the same information, he felt a powerful jerk. The ether around him began to vibrate chaotically. The collective consciousness of the group stirred in confusion. Colors blended in a violent vortex, and the whisperings turned into a cacophony of unintelligible sounds, amplified by his companion's fear. He felt a strong current of ether pull him aside, away from the familiar resonance of the group. Elara, Lysandra's consciousness radiated an alarm, her calm tone piercing through the chaos. Hold on to the map. Return to the path. But it was too late. Elara was pulled into an unstable etheric current, and the figures of his companions receded, their consciousnesses flickering in panic, becoming paler and smaller in this chaotic landscape of pure vibrations. He was alone, surrounded by countless whisperings that now sounded threatening and disorienting, amplified by his own rising fear and the echoes of his friend's concern. Elara fought to regain control over his consciousness. The chaotic vibrations of the ether battered him, and the whisperings became deafening, turning into screams and cries without meaning. He felt his inner light waver and his resonance lose harmony. He was lost in a storm of pure energies, separated from the safety of the map of passages and Lysandra's guidance. He tried to remember her words, to find an anchor in his mind. Focus on the path. Do not let them carry you away. But the path had vanished in this vortex, and the whisperings threatened to completely overtake him. And then, amidst the chaos, he heard that one voice again, clear and piercing. The key is in the vibration, your own. Find it. These words had a different resonance from the others. They were not external, but came from within, as if awakened by that first whisper. In the information, Elara instinctively began to focus on his own inner light, trying to feel its fundamental vibration, that unique tone that constituted the essence of his being. It was difficult. The external chaos constantly disrupted his concentration, and echoes of fear and disorientation pulled him back into panic. But perseverance was ingrained in the very core of the Sylvaerons. He took a deep breath. Even without physical lungs, the memory of that act helped him focus and concentrated on the inner silence beneath the surface of his consciousness, which was turbulent with whisperings. Slowly, he began to feel a subtle vibration, unique only to him. It was like the quiet hum of a crystal, a harmony of light and resonance that was his essential self. He tried to amplify that vibration, allowing it to fill his consciousness, to become a lighthouse in this etheric darkness. As his inner vibration grew stronger, the external chaos began to subside. The howling of the whisperings grew quieter. The colors lost their violent sharpness and began to flow more calmly. Even the unstable etheric currents around him slowed down, as if reacting to his renewed internal harmony. Then Elara noticed something new. In the distance, through gaps in the etheric fog, he began to glimpse faint light threads, the familiar lines of the scalar strings of the map of passages. They were far away, but they were there, like a quiet reminder of the path he had taken. Guided by his inner vibration as a compass, Elara began to move through the calming ether, directing his consciousness toward those distant light threads. The whisperings were still present, but they no longer possessed that threatening power. Now they sounded like distant murmurs, without the power to turn him from his path. Following that information, which was difficult to measure in the ether, Elara began to feel a familiar resonance, the presence of the others from his group. Their consciousnesses shimmered brighter as he approached them, like safe harbors in this vastness. When he finally reached them, Lysandra radiated relief. "Elara, it is good that you returned. What happened?" you lost focus. Elara mentally transmitted his information, describing that unusual whisper and how he had lost the scalar string, the connection to the map of passages. Lysandra listened carefully, then said, "Whisperings can be powerful, Elara. Sometimes they contain truth, but often they are just echoes without true meaning for us. It is important that you learn to distinguish them and rely on your own inner resonance as a guide. It is your anchor in this etheric world." They continued the journey following the map of passages, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a new level of caution, but also a new respect for the powers of the ether and the subtle forces acting within it. The young Sylvaerons realized that the first crossing was not just an initiation, but a first lesson in the complexity and mysteries of the higher etheric energies. In one information, as they passed by a vortex of iridescent colors, they heard the whisperings again. This time, Elara was more aware. He recognized random fragments of thoughts and emotions, but one whisper was once again different. "They are watching. From the other side of the veil. They are patient." This whisper was brief, but it left a deep impression on Elara. He felt an inexplicable chill, a sense that they were not alone in this expanse, that there were entities tracking them from the shadows of the ether. He looked around at the iridescent colors and pulsating scalar light threads, and for the first time felt the true depth of the mystery surrounding the higher etheric energies. They continued the journey, and Elara carried the information of that enigmatic whisper with him. "They are watching from the other side of the veil. They are patient." Who were they? What did they want? Questions flowed through his consciousness, intertwining with the etheric landscapes that were becoming increasingly unusual. They passed through areas where the light threads of the scalar strings formed complex, living structures, as if the ether itself were weaving invisible cities. They heard the music of the spheres, subtle harmonies of vibrations that resonated with the very core of their being. Occasionally, they encountered light entities, some fleeting and unaware of them, others conscious but occupied with their own inconceivable business. One of these conscious entities, of pure, pulsating azure light, stopped beside them. It did not communicate with words, but through a direct transmission of feelings and images into their consciousnesses. Elara felt a deep peace and ancient wisdom, visions of vast cosmic cycles, and the intertwining of the material and the etheric. It was a brief but profound encounter, leaving behind a sense of connection to something much greater than themselves. Lysandra explained that these were light resonators, entities that maintain harmony within the ether, acting as living catalysts of energies. Their existence was yet another proof of the complexity and diversity of this invisible world. As they approached the end of the map of passages, the ether began to take on a different character. The iridescent colors gave way to deeper, more muted shades, and the harmony of vibrations grew quieter, almost stifled. They felt a slight sensation of withdrawal, as if approaching the boundary between the ether and the material world. Then, whisperings of a different kind surrounded them. These were not fragments of thoughts or feelings, but clearer, more articulated voices, though still subtle and somewhat distant. Return, carry the knowledge. The boundary is near. Be prepared. Memory will remain. You are changed. These voices sounded as if they came from someone observing them and knowing where they were going. Elara felt again that uneasy sensation that they were not alone, that they were under a watchful eye. Lysandra slowed down, her consciousness radiating caution. These are the voices of return. They know we are nearing the boundary. Sometimes they can give useful insights, but we must not trust them blindly. Our return must be controlled. They reached the end of the map of passages, the point where the light threads dispersed, giving way to a gentle silvery glow. They felt their consciousness gradually condensing, the awareness of the physical body returning. Prepare for return, said Lysandra, her consciousness now firmer and more directed. Maintain focus and follow my resonance. One by one, they began to withdraw from the ether, following Lysandra's light back through the thin veil that divided the two worlds. Elara looked one last time at the muted colors of the ether, carrying with him the information of the whisperings, the light entities, and that inexplicable feeling of being watched. The return to the crystal hall was almost instantaneous, but everyone felt different. Something had changed within them, a subtle vibration in their consciousness that resonated with the experiences from the ether. The first crossing was complete. Lysandra looked at them again, her eyes now possessing a warmer glow. Welcome back. You have seen only a small part of the endless expanse of the higher etheric energies. You have learned the first important lesson, that it is a world of wonders and mysteries, a world that requires respect, caution, and above all, reliance on your own inner light. Elara felt fatigue, but also an unusual measure of inner peace. The whisperings had quieted in his mind, but the memory of them remained, especially that enigmatic voice. They are watching from the other side of the veil. They are patient. He knew that this journey was not the end, but only the beginning of his understanding of the secrets hidden between worlds. The days following the first crossing were filled with the analysis of their experiences. The young Sylvaerons shared their impressions, trying to understand the whisperings, the light entities, and the unusual etheric landscapes. Elara often thought, of that final whisper of the patient observers from the other side of the veil, Lysandra patiently answered their questions, emphasizing the importance of individual experience and the need for caution in interpreting what they heard and saw. The higher etheric energies are a mirror of our own minds, but also a window into the consciousnesses of other beings and entities, information and dimensions, she explained one day in the Hall of Resonances. Sometimes it is hard to discern what is an echo of our own being and what comes from outside. That is why inner silence and focus are so important. However, Elara could not shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, during meditation, he would feel a subtle presence, a barely perceptible pressure on the edges of his consciousness, as if someone invisible were examining him. It was not threatening, more like curious, but it still caused unease. One night, while observing the iridescent colors of the Sylvaeron northern sky and the distant great etheric barrier, Elara felt a mental impulse stronger than usual. It was not a whisper, but a clear, though quiet, thought that flashed through his mind. Time is approaching. The veil is becoming thinner. This time, there was no doubt that the thought did not originate from himself, nor from any of his companions. It was of a different vibration, of foreign origin. Elara shivered, feeling that something significant was happening, something connected to those patient observers. He decided to share this experience with Lysandra. The next morning, he found her in the Tower of Contemplation, surrounded by crystal resonators, emitting soothing vibrations. Lysandra listened carefully to Elara's story, her face remaining calm. But Elara felt a subtle change in her resonance, a hint of inner concern. "You felt a direct thought?" she asked quietly. "That is rarer on the first levels of the ether. Usually, communications are more subtle, fragmented." "It was clear, guide," Elara confirmed, "about the time approaching and the veil becoming thinner. Do you know what that could mean?" Lysandra was silent for a moment, then spoke. "There are ancient prophecies, Elara, about times of the intertwining of worlds, when the boundaries between the material and the etheric become more porous. In those periods, communication with entities from higher spheres can become easier, but also riskier." "Are they the observers?" Elara asked, remembering the whisper. Lysandra nodded slowly. "It is possible. There are many types of entities in the higher etheric energies, some more ancient and powerful than us. Some are benevolent, some indifferent, and some, their intentions are incomprehensible to us." From that day on, the atmosphere in the Luminiferous Flow Academy changed subtly. There was increased attention to the vibrations of the ether. and Lysandra intensified their training in mental protection and distinguishing external influences from their own thoughts. They learned about different types of etheric entities and the ways they could communicate or manipulate consciousnesses. One afternoon, while they were practicing the control of their resonance in the Hall of Echoes, the entire hall suddenly trembled. The crystal resonators began emitting disharmonious vibrations, and a powerful surge of foreign energy was felt in the air. "Stay calm," Lysandra cried out, her consciousness radiating strength and authority. "This is an external influence. Protect your minds." Elara felt his mind attacked by a wave of chaotic thoughts and strong emotions that were not his own. It was like 1,000 voices speaking simultaneously, trying to penetrate his consciousness. With effort, he applied the mental protection techniques Lysandra had taught them, creating a shield from his own inner light. The attack lasted only a few moments, but it left everyone shaken. When the energy withdrew, the hall grew quiet again, but the air still vibrated with tension. "What was that?" asked one of the youths, his voice trembling. "That was an attempted breakthrough from the higher spheres," Lysandra replied, her gaze serious. "The veil has indeed become thinner. We must be prepared for what follows." From that moment on, preparations became more intense. Lysandra and the mighty elders of the Luminiferous Flow Academy taught them ancient techniques for communicating with etheric entities, but also ways to recognize deception and protect themselves from negative influences. They learned about symbols, vibrations, and resonances that open or close the passages between worlds. One evening, Lysandra gathered the young Sylvaerons with the elders around an ancient crystal artifact in the Room of Prophecies. The artifact pulsed slowly with a pale light, and complex geometric patterns appeared on its surface. "This crystal of prophecies resonates with the flows of information and the ether," Lysandra explained. "Sometimes, in periods of intertwining, it can show visions of the future or echoes of the past. We will try to see what it can reveal to us about those who are watching us." Together, they aligned their thoughts and directed their consciousness toward the crystal. After a few moments of silence, the surface of the artifact began to change. The light became more intense, and the patterns turned into fluid images. Elara saw fragments of unusual landscapes, worlds that existed outside the material universe, filled with entities whose forms and nature he could not understand. He also saw dark shadows moving on the edges of those worlds, observing them with patience. One vision was particularly striking. It showed the thin veil between two worlds gradually thinning, and through it, hands began to penetrate, long and bony, with fingers shimmering with pale light. He felt the coldness radiating from those images. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving everyone with a sense of deep unease. Now they knew that the observers were not just curious, but that they might have specific intentions. The time of intertwining was indeed approaching, and the veil was becoming thinner. They had to be ready for what would pass through it. Understanding the threat changed their perspective. The first crossing was no longer just an initiation, but the first exposure to forces existing beyond their understanding. Lysandra, together with the elders, now worked with the youths with even greater dedication, preparing them for potential encounters. They learned about the history of the intertwining of worlds, about the heroes of Sylvaeron, who faced breakthroughs from higher spheres, and about ancient techniques for closing passages and protecting their reality. One of those techniques involved creating resonance fields, complex vibrational patterns that acted as a shield against foreign energies. They learned how to manipulate their inner light and align it with the planet's frequencies, creating a powerful bulwark. Elara discovered he had a natural inclination for manipulating vibrations. He could intuitively feel disharmony in the ether and correct it with his resonance. Lysandra recognized his talent and gave him special attention, teaching him advanced techniques. "Your sensitivity to the ether is exceptional, Elara," she told him one day. "You must learn to control and direct it. In times of intertwining, those with such a gift can be key in protecting our world." The days turned into intervals of minor cycles, and tension grew. Signs of intertwining became more obvious. Unusual light phenomena appeared in the sky, and etheric vibrations became more unstable. Whisperings became more frequent and clearer, sometimes carrying fragments of foreign languages and incomprehensible images. One evening, while they were meditating in the Hall of Silence, Elara felt that familiar mental pressure again. This time, however, it was stronger and accompanied by a sense of intense curiosity, as if someone were carefully examining him. He decided to try to respond. Using the telepathic communication techniques Lysandra had taught them, he directed a calm thought into the void. "Who are you? Why are you watching us?" The answer did not come in words, but as a powerful wave of emotions, ancient longing, patient anticipation, and something Elara interpreted as sadness. It was overwhelming and confusing, but it confirmed that the observers were aware of their presence and capable of some kind of communication. Lysandra felt the change in Elara's resonance and immediately interrupted the other's meditation. "What happened, Elara?" Elara shared his experience, describing the strong emotions he received. Lysandra was pensive. "That is significant," she said. "A direct emotional response suggests their intentions are more complex than mere curiosity. Perhaps they do not only want to watch, but also to establish some kind of connection." The ensuing discussion was long and intense. Some feared the unknown and advocated for strengthening defensive mechanisms. Others, guided by Elara's experience, thought that an attempt at cautious exploration of their motives should perhaps be made. The elders eventually made a decision. We will prepare for the worst, but we will not close the door to the possibility of understanding. Lysandra addressed Elara mentally. Your ability to feel their vibrations will be key. We will try to establish controlled communication, but we must be extremely cautious. Preparations began. Elara practiced intensely to filter foreign influences and focus on the essence of what he was receiving. The mighty elders and Lysandra consulted the ancient etheric books, seeking the wisdom of their ancestors about the times of intertwining. One night, when the culmination of the intertwining was near, Lysandra gathered the young Sylvaerons in the hall of the crystal gates, the ancient portal connecting their world to the higher etheric energy. The crystal gates pulsed with intense light, and the ether around them vibrated strongly. This is the intersection point, Lysandra explained. Here the veil is thinnest. If we want to communicate, this is the place. Elara stood in front of the crystal gates, directing his consciousness into the ether. He felt the presence of the observers, now much closer and more intense than before. He sent a calm thought again. We are Sylvaerons. We wish to understand your presence. This time, the response was different. It was not just a wave of emotions, but also fragmented images, visions of worlds filled with strange beauty and ancient wisdom, but also depictions of loneliness and sorrow. The sense of patient anticipation was still present, but now it was mixed with hope. And then, for the first time, Elara received something resembling words, not in their usual form, but as a direct understanding of meaning. We are travelers. We seek return. The words echoed in Elara's mind, carrying the weight of millions of cycles. We are travelers. We seek return. Return where? From where? Questions swarmed in his consciousness. Lysandra felt the change in Elara's resonance and asked him mentally, "What did they say?" Elara conveyed the message. Lysandra was pensive, then looked at the crystal gates, which were pulsing ever more strongly. Return, that can mean many things, she said. We must be cautious. Perhaps they seek sanctuary, and perhaps something else entirely. They decided to continue with cautious communication. Elara directed his consciousness toward the observers again, trying to clarify their message. Who are you? From where do you come? What do you seek? The answer came in fragments, like puzzle pieces. Our worlds, lost, long ago. The veil, once thin, now thick, separated. Memories, fading, the path home, forgotten. You resonate. Vibrations familiar, hope. It became clear that the observers were not a threatening force, but an ancient race that had lost its way. and sought a way to return home. The veil between worlds, once an easy passage, had thickened over time, leaving them trapped in the higher spheres of etheric energy with fading information about their origin. Something in the Sylvaerons' vibrations, in the resonance of their planet Sylvaeron, awakened hope in them. Lysandra felt the change in Elara's mental projections, understanding that the situation was becoming complicated. Ask them what they need. Can we help them? Elara conveyed the question. The traveler's response was filled with longing, connection, a bridge through the veil, your energy, resonance, the key. It began to emerge that the travelers did not want to pass by force, but needed the Sylvaerons' help to re-establish a connection with their lost worlds. Their energy, the vibration of the planet Sylvaeron itself, contained the key to opening the passage through the thickened veil. However, there was also a measure of caution. Helping an ancient race with unknown powers and origin carried risks. Lysandra called an emergency meeting with the mighty elders of the Luminiferous Flow Academy, conveying her findings and Elara's experiences. The discussion was long. Some thought this was a unique opportunity to gain new knowledge and establish contact with an ancient civilization. Others feared potential dangers and advocated for cutting off communication and strengthening defensive mechanisms. In the end, caution prevailed, but also curiosity. It was decided to continue with cautious communication and try to understand more about the traveler's needs and potential risks. Elara became the mediator between the two races, carefully conveying questions and answers. He learned about the traveler's history, their former worlds, the cataclysm that scattered them, and their long search for the way home. He felt increasing empathy for their situation, for their cyclic longing, for their lost home. However, Lysandra constantly emphasized caution. We must know the price of this help, Elara. What will they ask in return? Will their return endanger our world? Elara conveyed these questions. The traveler's response was sincere and sad. We do not wish to take only to return. Our wisdom, our knowledge, we would offer in gratitude. They claimed they wished to take nothing from the Sylvaerons, but only to return to their home. As a sign of gratitude, they would offer their ancient knowledge and wisdom, accumulated on the material side through cycles, and on the etheric side through information, during their wanderings through the higher etheric energies. The decision was still difficult. Helping an ancient race to return through the thin veil carried uncertainty, but refusing help to beings who had suffered for cycles and offered their knowledge in return seemed cruel. Eventually, the elders made a historic decision. They agreed to help the travelers, but under strict conditions and with all measures of precaution. Elara would continue to be the mediator, and Lysandra and the others would work on developing a way to control the flow of energy through the crystal gates and ensure Sylvaeron's safety. the time of intertwining reached its peak. The veil was thinnest yet. Elara stood in front of the crystal gates, feeling the presence of the ancient travelers on the other side. Together with Lysandra, the other young Sylvaerons, and the mighty elders, he began to direct his inner light, aligning it with the planet's resonance, creating a bridge of energy through the thin veil. On the other side, he felt the joy and hope of the ancient travelers. For the first time in many cycles, the path home was open. They began to pass through the energy bridge, their etheric forms shimmering with ancient light. The passage was slow and gradual. Elara felt his energy flowing, connecting two worlds. Lysandra and the others carefully monitored the process, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. When the last of the ancient travelers passed through the veil, he felt a deep wave of gratitude that flooded his mind. And then, silence. The veil began to thicken again. Communication was cut off, and the ancient travelers returned home. The Sylvaerons remained alone, with the memory of this unusual encounter and with hope for the wisdom they might one day receive in return. The time of intertwining passed. The veil was thick again, but something had changed. The Sylvaerons were no longer alone in their understanding of the universe. They knew that other races, other destinies, existed hidden behind the thin veil of reality, and their journey of understanding had only just begun. Days passed calmly on Sylvaeron again, but a new kind of quiet thoughtfulness was felt in the luminiferous Flow Academy. The experience with the ancient travelers left a deep mark on everyone, especially on Elara and his companions. They realized the fragility of the boundaries of reality and the existence of worlds and beings beyond their usual understanding. Lysandra now led more advanced studies on the higher etheric energies, focusing on the analysis of the vibrations and resonances that enabled communication with the travelers. They studied the etheric books about the times of intertwining and tried to understand the cycles of these phenomena. Elara continued to develop his gift of sensitivity to the ether. He discovered he could now perceive subtle vibrations he hadn't noticed before, quiet echoes of thoughts and emotions flowing through the etheric currents. Sometimes he would catch distant fragments of whisperings, but now they were less enigmatic, like distant echoes of unknown stories. One afternoon, while meditating by the crystal gates, Elara felt a slight resonance that did not originate from his world. It was weak, barely perceptible, but different from anything he had felt before. He instinctively knew it was coming from the other side of the veil. He carefully directed his consciousness toward that source, trying to discern more. After a few moments of concentration, he received an image, a vision of a world filled with a pale, shining light and tall, slender structures that looked as if they were woven from light itself. He felt a quiet, melancholic joy radiating from that world, It was the world of the ancient travelers. Elara was excited by this discovery. He immediately shared his vision with Lysandra. She listened carefully, then said, "This is significant, Elara. That means the connection is still thin, that we can still feel their presence. Perhaps one day they will indeed offer us their knowledge." From that day on, Elara regularly directed his consciousness toward the traveler's world, trying to maintain the connection. Sometimes he would receive brief images or feelings, but direct communication was no longer possible, as if the passage had begun to close again. Still, the knowledge that the travelers had arrived home and were there, in their world of light, brought a sense of fulfillment. Time passed, and the Sylvaerons continued to learn and grow. The experience with the intertwining of worlds became part of their history, reminding them of the secrets of the universe yet to be discovered. The young Sylvaerons, including Elara and his companions, became a new generation of ether explorers, guided by curiosity and respect for the unknown. Elara continued to develop his connection with the ether, becoming increasingly skilled at discerning subtle vibrations and whisperings. Sometimes, during his journeys into the higher etheric energies, he would feel again that gentle touch of the ancient traveler's consciousness, a distant greeting across the veil. One day, while Elara was independently exploring deeper layers of the ether, following the trail of ancient resonances, he came across an area filled with unusual light formations. It was as if the ether itself were creating complex art installations here, with iridescent colors and continuously changing forms. In the midst of that etheric art, Elara noticed a faint pulsating light that had a different vibration from everything else. He approached closer and felt a powerful mental impulse, much clearer than the traveler's distant echoes. "Welcome, seeker." The thought was direct, powerful, and full of ancient wisdom. Elara felt awe. It was the voice of someone else, different from the travelers. "Who are you?" Elara asked mentally, cautiously. The answer arrived slowly, as if words were traveling across vast distances. "We are the guardians of the silent space between worlds. We watched your interaction with the travelers. Your empathy is worthy." Elara was stunned. The guardians of the silent space between worlds. He had heard of them only in ancient legends, as mythical beings maintaining balance in the cosmos. "Why do you speak to us?" Elara asked. "Time is moving again. Cycles are intertwining. There will be more encounters. You must be ready. Your connection to the ether is the key." Before Elara could ask more questions, the connection was cut. The light formation began to fade, and the guardian's voice vanished in the quiet vibrations of the ether. Elara returned to the material world with a new sense of urgency. He shared his encounter with Lysandra. She was serious, but also somewhat concerned. The Guardians. If they have truly addressed you, Elara, that means something significant is brewing. We must be even more cautious in our explorations and preparations. The Guardian's words echoed in Elara's mind. Time is moving again. Cycles are intertwining. There will be more encounters. You must be ready. He knew that the first crossing was only the beginning. The real adventure, the actual mystery of the universe, was only just starting, and the Sylvaerons had a role in it, a role they had yet to understand as the guardians of the Golden Chain themselves. In the days that followed, the luminiferous Flow Academy was like a hive filled with the mental buzz of research and preparation. The encounter with the guardians of the silent space, of the higher etheric energy between worlds, introduced a new level of seriousness to their ether studies. Lysandra organized special sessions of meditation and mental discipline, helping the young Sylvaerons strengthen their connections with their inner light and learn how to recognize and filter different types of etheric vibrations. Elara became a central figure in these preparations. His ability to feel the subtle flows of the ether and receive direct mental impulses was unique. Lysandra worked with him on developing his skill of long-distance communication and understanding the complex energy patterns characterizing various entities in the higher etheric energies. Time passed, and signs of the re-intertwining of worlds became more frequent. Unusual light phenomena in the sky were no longer a rarity, and etheric vibrations became more intense, sometimes causing minor disturbances in the material world. Whisperings returned, now clearer and more diverse, carrying echoes of different worlds and consciousnesses. One night, while Elara was meditating near the crystal gates, he felt the Guardian's presence again. This time, the message was more direct and urgent. The time of crossing is near. Open your senses. Watch. Listen. Elara immediately informed Lysandra. Together they gathered the other Sylvaerons and headed toward the hall of the crystal gates. The artifact pulsed with powerful light, and the ether around it vibrated with an intensity everyone could feel. Lysandra stood before them. Be calm. Open your minds, but maintain focus. Follow Elara. He will be our guide in this moment. Elara closed his mental eyes and directed his consciousness into the ether. He followed the Guardian's instructions, opening his senses to the subtle changes in the vibrations around the crystal gates. At first, he felt only the familiar chaos of intertwining a mixture of energies and echoes from different spheres. But then he began to discern new patterns, faint but steady signals coming from the other side of the veil. These were sounds, not words, but melodies, strange and beautiful, full of ancient sorrow and hope. Listen to the melodies, came the thought from the Guardians. You must be ready. Elara shared his experience with the others. Together they focused on those unusual melodies, trying to align them with their own inner vibrations. The crystal gates began to resonate with those sounds, and their light became even more intense. Then visual depictions began to appear. Through the pulsating light of the crystal gates, silhouettes of abstract entities whose forms could not even be imagined began to emerge. It was fascinating and terrifying at the same time. The feeling that the boundaries of reality were becoming porous was palpable. They knew the doors were opening, that the encounter was about to happen. "Be ready," the guardian's voice repeated in Elara's mind. "What passes through the veil will be a reflection of what is inside." Elara looked at his companions. On their faces, he saw a mixture of fear and wonder. They knew they were standing on the threshold of something new, something that would forever change their understanding of the universe and the higher etheric energy. The crystal gates shone the brightest yet, and the melodies reached their peak. The veil for a moment dissolved completely, revealing a passage through which silhouettes began to appear. Spread the word about our civilization as far as possible to everyone you know, so that all may hear and discover the wonders of the Sylvaerons. For the more you know about us, the closer will be the moment of our arrival.